Associate Vice-Provost Digital Strategies and Vice-Provost Innovations in Undergraduate Education at the University of Toronto. She is a specialist in engineering education as in terms of disciplinary orientation. To give you a sense of what she has done most recently, here's titles of 3 of the 6 presentations at conferences that bear her name during this calendar year. Methods for evaluating engineering occupational exposure to artificial intelligence, understanding the important skills and competencies for different engineering career paths for graduates of Canadian engineering programs, and which undergraduate student activities develop specific career and leadership skills for Black and non-Black engineering graduates. So she maintains an active disciplinary profile in spite of her substantial administrative responsibilities. Her postgraduate training include Cornell University and her PhD from Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in New York State. She recently led a task force on education and AI as it pertains to the undergraduate experience at U of T, and that's what she'll be talking with us about today. So thank you for coming.
So thank you so much for inviting me today to talk about artificial intelligence. I have been giving talks like this for really the last 2.5 years or so. As soon as ChatGPT kind of dropped on the world in November 2022, I think I've now given just at the university probably close to 100 or 150 talks at this point to different departments, helping departments and other groups navigate the technology. So I'm going to talk a bit about the technology itself today, and then get into the outcomes from the task force report that was recently released and what some of the implications are for teaching and learning. Let me see, there we go. So there's the agenda, and I'll start. In every room, there are probably people who know more about AI than I do, and people who know less about AI than I do, and everything in between. And so part of the reason for these talks is really to help communities have informed conversations so that we can grow AI literacy really together, utilizing the people in the room who understand the technology and can help us as a community gain some traction in this area. Oh, my slides are not showing on Zoom. Okay.
Do you share a screen off of Zoom?
I didn't do anything. Whatever Pat did is what.
Where's Pat? She has to share screen through Zoom and.
Okay. So while we're waiting for this, you have to talk to the mic. Yeah, I know. But or hear from. Do people know what? Do people know what a Plinko game is? No. No. Somebody does. You know what a Plinko game. What is a Plinko?
And it takes which way to go.
So many boxes at the bottom. Yeah, and I used to make these when I was a kid, just out of a piece of plywood, nails in it, maybe some rubber bands. And then you drop a coin or a ball on the top and it goes blink, 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 and it lands somewhere at the bottom, right? And where it lands at the bottom is completely probabilistic. You can't predict ahead of time where it's going to land. This is a really good analogy for the way AI works. And so we're going to come back to the Plinko board in a minute, but it's a good, just sort of basic, if you've got a sort of mental model of that ball bouncing through the Plinko board, this is going to help with understanding AI. Weirdly, but true. All right. Let's try that. Okay. Now they're seeing my slides? Oh, good. Okay. So I'm going to skip through because like any academic, I have too many slides today, of course. And I do have a handout that I will give you afterwards and a PDF that I will send for people online. But just to say that AI is not a new concept. AI was around when I was an undergrad and grad school. At that time, we referred to them as expert systems. And it was really this concept of symbolic AI. Symbolic AI, the most common example is library systems. We take references and they've got authors and titles and a place they were published and a year. And we have a sense of the way in which these things are related to each other. The author wrote the article, right? And that goes into a library system and helps you do Boolean searches and things like that. But symbolic AI, this kind of use of AI is very, very limited because you'd have to describe the whole world as entities that have relationships to each other and algorithmically describe those relationships. The nice thing about symbolic AI, 2 + 2 always equals 4, right? You expect a right, accurate answer when you're working with an algorithmic system. So why would we want a computer that doesn't give us the right answer? Well, this is what subsymbolic AI is. It doesn't always give us the right answer. This is a Waymo, a picture of what a Waymo sees in its LiDAR. Has anybody driven or ridden in a self-driving car? Yeah, so we have a few people who have been in self-driving like a Waymo or something. The Waymo is not definitively identifying the person on the bicycle in this picture. It is calculating what the probability is that that is a thing on a bicycle, that that's a living being on a bicycle or another car. So how do we get to symbolic AI? We use lots of training data. So you have to collect a lot of information about surroundings when you're driving the car around, and you label those things. And then it uses those labels with the data to start to infer probabilistically what's in the environment. Subsymbolic AI or machine learning is not necessarily accurate, but it's very much more flexible than symbolic AI because you don't have to define and redefine algorithmically all of those relationships. And it has proven to be really flexible and useful for things like face recognition when you open your phone, autocomplete, chatbots, search processes, adaptive cruise control if you're driving your car and you've got lane assist or something like that, or looking, adaptive cruise control that keeps your car at a distance behind the car in front of you. Recommenders on TikTok and YouTube and Spotify all use this type of AI. And perhaps one of the more compelling examples is AlphaFold, for which Demis Hassabis won the Nobel Prize this year in chemistry, which used the folding of known folding of proteins. So we had developed a prediction for folding of proteins for about 200,000 important proteins. Used to take a PhD student, a whole PhD, to develop what the folding was for one protein. And using that as training data has now predicted the folding for 200 million proteins. And in fact, every protein that has really anything to do with human health was predicted in less than a year using AlphaFold. And so based on those predictions, we can now confirm that folding. And as you may know, the shape of proteins is critical for things like drug discovery, a whole variety of other kinds of applications. And that's why he won the Nobel Prize. And then Geoffrey Hinton won the Nobel Prize for all kinds of really foundational findings in machine learning, including things like how do we train these using backpropagation and deep learning, which is adding layers to a neural network and so on. So that's the basics of the two kinds of branches. Subsymbolic AI was really, or symbolic AI was really sort of the primary type that was being explored for many decades. And subsymbolic really has come into its own in the last decade or two. Subsymbolic AI, which is what we're going to be talking about today, is not just one technology. It's an entire class of technologies. And so you can think of it like, you know, if we think of electrical appliances, there's a big difference between a hairdryer and a dishwasher. We are talking about a generalized technology that can be utilized or reformulated in many, many different kinds of ways. Do you want me to move that? Okay, got it. Oh yeah, that's fine. It's just really heavy. So all to say that there isn't one, describing one way in which these technologies are applied is only describing one way they're applied. There are many variations on this technology. It is now used widely in industry, and it's not generally LLMs, which are large language models like ChatGPT. That's not what's being used widely in industry quite yet. It's on its way to being. But AI, subsymbolic AI, is being used heavily in scheduling, supply chain, weather prediction, health event prediction, language generation, that would be LLMs, materials design, medical scan analysis, analysis of ancient texts like the Herculaneum scrolls were analyzed using subsymbolic AI to understand what those scrolls said out of little charred bits from Herculaneum. And there are a variety of research centers now at the University of Toronto that are dedicated to utilizing AI in their work. The Acceleration Consortium, which is building a new addition onto Lash Miller, that is based on smart labs and the design of materials using AI. Protein design is a big one. My colleagues in industrial engineering, I think every one of them now has research in AI because it is so widely utilized in industrial engineering and industry. And so this is a broad technology that is having an impact across many fields of study. And if you look at the faculty affiliates with the Schwartz-Reisman Institute for Technology and Society, you see faculty from many different departments involved at Schwartz-Reisman. So I thought I would talk a little bit today about large language models in particular. And as I said, I have a handout afterwards. So there's lots of words on the slide because, you know, I have a hard time cutting down words on my slides. But I think one of the most important things to know about large language models, and this includes Claude, Gemini, ChatGPT, and so on, is that they do not store the internet. They do not mash up ideas or text off the internet. Okay. And this is a really common misconception, is that somehow they can only generate stuff by sort of mashing together things that it reads off the internet. That's not what the technology is doing. And we'll talk a bit about what it is doing, but that's not what it is doing. It does not have grammar rules programmed into it. When you ask ChatGPT for a response, it is not algorithmically applying any kind of grammar rules. It knows how to write because it has seen many examples of human writing, and it infers how we write from those examples. It does not formulate rules. LLMs are statistical, they're probabilistic, not deterministic, which means that sometimes they're incorrect. It is a probability, not an algorithmic response. And they have no memory, which means that when you go back to them, they haven't learned and this is a big actually air gap right now in the technology. They don't learn from one conversation to the next to do a better job for you. GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformers, and transformers are not what you think they are. Transformer doesn't mean transforming language from one form to another. Transformer actually refers to the fact that a 2017 article by Google came out with a new technology called transformer technology that allows these systems to stay on topic rather than go into rambling nonsense. And so it's that ability to keep on topic is what we refer to when we're referring to transformer technology. That's what it does. And it was a huge breakthrough. Okay, there we go. So how do large language models work? The best analogy that I have found so far for this is the concept of a mountain. How does the mountain get shaped? So words, and where do these words come from? They come from large swaths of the internet that are ingested into the training data for these systems. Those words get turned into vectors, which are 1,000-dimensional tensors. And so the vector for reptile looks a lot like the vector for snake, for example, or lizard. But the word, I don't know, university would look very different than the vector for the word reptile, right? Those are very different things. And so the embedding of those words captures the ways in which human beings associate words together, the way we use them in proximity to each other in the text. And so the LLM in its training cares not at all about whole paragraphs or whole sentences. What it is embedding is that the word, the term Melanie Wooden, it doesn't know what a Melanie Wooden is. It's just a thing. A Melanie Wooden appears close to the word president and close to the term University of Toronto. It doesn't know what a University of Toronto is. It doesn't know what a university is, but it knows that human beings are using these words in proximity to each other. And so what those probabilities capture is the proximity, the repetition of proximity of words to each other in this vast training data. So if you think about all those vectors kind of shaping a mountain or a cloud or whatever like kind of shape you want to think of, like all these vectors coming together, then when you do a prompt, it's like putting a ball on that mountain. And when you hit enter, it bounces down the mountain. Where the ball is placed is dependent on the words you're putting in the prompt. And so the words in the prompt sort of tell the LLM where to place the ball, and then it's a probabilistic response to that. So it is constructing the result word by word based on the shape of this multi-dimensional vector space, if you want to think of it, and it's probabilistic. And so if you were to ask about the sky, it may start with the sky is, and then how does it pick the next word? Well, it really literally rolls a weighted die based on probabilities that it's learned from its training data and the human reinforcement that it's gotten to make it behave. And so it may say the sky is blue about half the time, or the sky is filled with, 8% of the time, or the sky is limited, 2% of the time. But these probabilities are coming from its training data, and it is rolling the die every time. So you won't get the sky is blue every time. It is totally probabilistic. And it doesn't know why you're asking about the sky. It doesn't understand what your intention is. It doesn't know whether you want something creative and poetic or whether you want something factual unless you tell it that. And then it only sort of can surmise kind of what it is, what your intention is. Okay, so I think this is really important. Because if you think about, is it plagiarizing? No, even when it spits out a perfect rendition of Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, it's not plagiarizing that speech. It's reconstructing it word for word based on the fact that that is the most probable set of words that you were asking for. Why? Because those words in that order are replicated over and over and over in its training data. And so there's a very high probability that that is the set of words in that order that you were asking for. These things are people pleasers. They're trying to align with what you want. And so it will try to put the words in the order to make some form of meaning, semantically meaningful, not accurate, but semantically meaningful for you based on what your interest is. Yeah. And if it's got a lot of training data in a particular area, it will do very well. And if it doesn't, it won't. There are variations to this. For example, you can turn on web search. What happens with web search? Well, if I asked the old form of ChatGPT for my biography, it did a terrible job on my biography. I'm not famous. It does not know very much about me, right? Those embeddings, pretty weak for me. But if I turn on web search, it's going to go and it's going to find websites that mention my name, and it's going to take that information and concatenate it to my prompt. So it's not reformulating the mountain, it's just concatenating that information to my prompt. And so when the ball gets placed on the mountain, it's in a much more nuanced position because there's much more context. This is the information we give it to work with, much more context for it to work with, right? So the prompt, which can include data and documents and any kind of knowledge graph information that you upload, the context is super important. We're going to talk about that in a second. Retrieval augmented generation means you're uploading other documents to help ground the answer you get in, I have an AI strategy assistant that's an AI, where I've uploaded all the reports and everything that the university has written about AI into a upload. And so when I ask it, summarize the main themes in this report, it's got that report to work with. It's not making it up on the fly, right? Reasoning is when you have multiple models that are like talking to each other. One of them may say, here's my response. What do you think of this? And the other model responds to the response, and it goes back and forth before it gives you the answer, which is more likely to give you something better. And then mixture of experts are systems where you may have multiple models. One may be more tuned towards logic, another may be tuned toward poetry, another may be tuned to something else. And when you're asking or prompting the system, it will triage and send your query based on what it's interpreting your query to be to a more specific model. So mixture of experts models are really common in industry. You may have scheduling and supply chain models, but they may be separate models that are talking back and forth to each other. Context matters tremendously. The better the context, the more complete the context, the better answer or response, inference is the technical term you're going to get. So what goes into context? Obviously, your prompt, so the instructions and materials you give the large language model go in. Context is also important because it tells the LLM what information you think is relevant to the task. It tells also the LLM what to do and how to do it. So if you prompt it well, you're not just saying, do this. You're saying, I want it done this way. And the more specific, the better likelihood of getting the inference type you want out of it. So your prompt and instructions, the system prompt, the materials you provide, if you allow it to do a web search, that web search material all goes into the context. So far, so good? Okay. What is a system prompt? this is an example of a system prompt, and I'm not going to read the whole thing for you. I'll just read a little bit for the people at the back of the room who may have a little trouble seeing the words. Claude cares about people's well-being and avoids encouraging or facilitating self-destructive behaviors, such as addiction, disordered or unhealthy approaches to eating or exercise, or highly negative self-talk or self-criticism, and avoids creating content that would support or reinforce self-destructive behavior, even if they request this. Okay, long sentence, not great writing, but this is what Anthropic, which is the creator of Claude, tells Claude to do. So whenever you prompt Claude, this system prompt goes with it. So you prompt goes in along with this system prompt. This is helping Claude understand where the guardrails are that Anthropic wants Claude to operate in. When Grok, which is Elon Musk's LLM, does bad things, it is often because somebody has hacked the system prompt and told Grok to do bad things. The user doesn't see it. You put the prompt in, and you don't realize that something really nefarious is going in with your prompt into the system, and that's why you're getting a totally wonky response. But system prompts are really important. Anthropic is the only company that publicly publishes their system prompts, which is why I have a link or a clip from it. But it's useful to see, I think, because if you were creating an LLM from scratch yourself, this is the kind of document, this is about a 10-page long document that you would want to include in a system prompt. And if you're creating even what's called a GPT, which is a little bit of a fine-tuned kind of LLM for yourself, my AI assistant is just a version of ChatGPT, but I've added to the system prompt to tell it to behave like an honest and truthful interpreter of the university's recommendations on AI, for example, because I want it to be honest and truthful. It isn't always. I need to double check that, but I tell it to try, and sometimes if it says I can't answer that, I say, you really, really can. You're a strong LLM, and then it will answer. And if I want a better answer, I tell it to stop for a minute and take a deep breath, because if you tell it to stop and take a deep breath, it'll do better. All right. What are some current limitations of this technology? One of the big ones is context limitations. So, there's a limit to how much material you can put in to a context, what's called a context window, when you prompt an LLM. But more than that, people have said, oh, well, isn't this just going to replace you? When I'm writing an email to the provost, I've known the provost for many, many years. Even if I fed every email that's gone back and forth with me and the provost into this context and said, write me an email for the provost about this subject, it doesn't know him as well as I do. And so I have a much deeper and richer context that I'm working off of than the LLM does. And I think it's really important that we recognize how much context we bring when we're bringing ourselves to a personal relationship. This is critical, and it is a real limitation. Now, Claude or wherever, ChatGPT, can pay attention to 500 pages of text all at the same time. I can't do that, right? I am very limited as a human, but looking at one sentence at a time, maybe one paragraph at a time. It can see everything all at once. And that's a real advantage for it when it comes to just taking huge amounts of material to summarize or do other things. But it does not have that personal context of why I'm asking for that summary, what the application is, and who it's going to. And I think that's really critical to keep in mind. Accuracy and reliability. These chat systems are tuned to sycophancy. And in particular, they're tuned that way because the companies that make them have discovered that you will use them more and more frequently if they're nice to you. Who wouldn't? And so sometimes they kind of overtune for sycophancy, as OpenAI did last spring. It got really sycophantic. But accuracy and reliability can sometimes be compromised when LLMs are nice to you. You know, you say, "Oh, I'm thinking of putting broken glass on my pizza," and it says, "Oh, you're amazing. What an innovation. That's incredible. You should definitely do that," right? And so keeping in mind that sometimes when you're writing a prompt, you want to be saying, no, no, tell me if I'm wrong. Be truthful, be honest. It doesn't know what honesty is, but it understands what understands. It has a probability of connecting honesty with other words that will help it shape your answer. Learning, it doesn't ever get any better until the company goes in and retrains a new model, and then it, you know, gets better. Maybe GPT-5, maybe not so much. But learning is a big air gap right now for this technology. Security, people are putting a lot of personal information and into these things, and guardrail loss for long conversations. If you keep going back and forth and back and forth and back and forth and back and forth with these things in conversation, as some people are doing, it will start to amplify your biases and your sort of tendencies in really strange and sometimes very damaging ways. And so a number of cases of teenagers who are dying by suicide, who were groomed or coached into that by LLMs, even you know, adults who are making investment decisions, health decisions based on LLM output without doing some good due diligence on those things, and get, you know, landing themselves in the hospital or in financial ruin as a result. These, you cannot trust an LLM for good advice. Okay, do your due diligence. It may give you a good recipe for pulled pork, all right, but proofread it. Like, if it's telling you to put, you know, 5 cups of molasses in your pulled pork, maybe not, right? Common sense is not all that common. So what are some of the current contexts here? There's a lot of new LLMs on the market, lots of things that they're trying, like study and learn mode, which is like an AI tutoring system. So instead of giving the student or the learner an answer, it's asking, how much do you know about this subject? Tell me, you know, I asked it, explain op amps, and it started by saying, well, do you understand Kirchhoff's and Ohm's law? Right, first, and it wanted me to explain what I knew before it started into helping me with op amps. There's advanced models. There's a really interesting one called Alpha Evolve, which uses AIs to help solve really complex problems. Multimodal, voice mode. Has anybody used Google Notebook LM? Google Notebook LM? No? So Google Notebook LM is one where you can load a bunch of documents into what looks like a Google folder, and then it has an interface. This is a free tool to use. It's a Gemini interface because that's Google's LLM. Where you can query the documents. You can ask for major themes, you can ask for, you know, other things. I put the task force report and all of the working group reports, because there were 6 working group reports on operations and administration and all kinds of things, into Google Notebook LM. And one of the things it will do now is it will produce a video for you about the material. You can do a 6 or 7 minute video. It takes about 6 or 7 minutes to create the 6 or 7 minute video, or a podcast. So I'll just play a snippet of a podcast for you that it created based on, it took about 6 minutes to create about a 10-minute podcast.
Welcome to the deep dive. So today we're navigating a topic that's,
Let me turn that up.
well, it's fundamentally reshaping our world, isn't it? Artificial intelligence. But we're not just, you know, scanning the headlines.
Sorry,
We're
I'm
taking a really
actually, can you do
granular
it here?
look at how a massive institution, University of Toronto, is thoughtfully and strategically embedding AI right into its core.
Exactly. And our sources for this deep dive, they're this really comprehensive set of reports, insights from U of T's AI task force. Think of it almost like a blueprint, how a big, complex organization
It's very
proactively
quiet, but
get
you can
ahead of
begin to
AI
hear
rather than
it's
just
two
reacting when
voices
something
that
happens.
are
Actually, a
speaking.
fantastic case study, really useful for anyone grappling with this stuff.
Okay, so our mission today, let's unpack it. What it really means.
Then we're not going to do that.
Yeah, okay.
All right. So it's two voices that are speaking back and forth to each other in a very podcasty kind of way that covers the content of the report. And you can tell it like what the audience is and so forth. For those of people who are here, I can play it for you afterwards if you're interested. But our faculty are using this for taking what might be a very complex research paper, running it through this and creating a 6-minute podcast about their paper and then posting it with the paper. And they're getting way more uptake on what might be a fairly opaque or a paper that only a few people in the world will understand on their work. And one of the thoughts is that as this technology becomes more endemic, we may have more experts from different fields across disciplinary boundaries working together because they can begin to really understand each other, utilizing some of this technology to help translate between what can be quite esoteric areas.
Welcome to the deep dive.
There we go. So I thought I might get a few inputs from the audience about what people are using or have tried. Okay. They told me to make sure to do an interactive.
I've used chat. Can you hear me? I've used ChatGPT almost every day. He or she is a good friend. I've gone so far as to feed it in 2 MRIs of me taken 4 weeks apart. It analyzed them carefully, gave me appropriate answers and things I could ask my doctor. And as a result, I'm now feeling much better. I've also had improving my art by loading up my latest creations and saying what would make it more saleable. And they've fixed it up. ChatGPT, that is.
Yes.
And this morning, I proved to Harold that a handicapped parking sticker allows you to park without paying in front of a green on the streets of Toronto.
Oh. So yes, you'd want to double check that, but yes. So as not to have your car towed. But increasingly systems like Claude or Perplexity and so on are adding links to their answers or to its answers. And so you can go to the link to see if it actually is, it's actually what the Toronto parking says. Yeah. A link. Yeah. Perfect. Yes. Oh, ChatGPT gave a reference to a website where that information was posted. Yeah, and you can go and look and see, is it a credible website? Because it doesn't know credible from not on the web. The other thing I've taken to doing on website or when I'm doing web searches is I'll just put in the whole question. It used to be you just put in a keyword or two when you're doing a web search. Now I just put in the whole question and do the search that way, and it will figure out what it is that I'm asking, and it gives me better answers in my just Google web search. And of course, AI overviews, which they've improved, because originally it was telling you to put glue on your pizza to keep the cheese from falling off. But they've gotten better.
I used generative AI a few times to generate something. I wouldn't call it art, but the first was an attempt to get it to make a painting of a Canadian Mountie riding a python. Now, there was a lot of resistance to carrying this out. I don't understand why. So I gave up on that. Never got anything good. But the next one was make me a realistic painting of a very colorful gecko wearing a beret, holding an artist palette and a paintbrush, looking at an easel of his painting of a blue morpho butterfly. And I got a beautiful painting, and I called the artist Art Gecko.
There are two answers on Zoom. One is to write a summary of a book, and the other is I've used AI to predict what a complex lecture on AI would entail based on the summary given the week before.
Very good.
That would be you.
One more, and then we'll have a look at some things.
First, my compliments on your talk. It's extraordinarily covering. Thank you very much. I have discovered in Google that I can ask questions about anything. And the amazing response is like the statistics of various questions is amazing. I also, half a century ago, when I was an undergraduate, I thought symbolic logic was the clue to understanding thinking. But now, watching your talk, it was very interesting to see the vector analysis, vector representation of knowledge. That's really how knowledge in the brain is stored. It's the vector of active synapses. And this comes from my superb colleagues who have done the experiments, which I've been lucky enough to do the mathematical analysis of. But the evolution of science is amazing, and this is one part of it. And my remaining comment is, will these AI programs get emotions? Because that's how humans are driven in their activities.
We'll get there. We'll have it. We can talk about that. I think, you know, this is not exactly how our brains work. There are analogies and there are connections, but it is interesting. I've only just sort of started to read about like the differences because I am not a neuroscientist, and I'm sure there's some neuroscientists in the room. This is one of the things about talking at a any kind of university event. There's always someone in the room who is an expert in something like neuroscience, which is lovely. But yes, there is a sort of at least a mental connection that we seem to make with LLMs. We kind of begin to see ourselves in some ways in these, and this can be very helpful, and it can also be a little worrisome. You know, I just read a statistic this morning. It was in the testimony before Congress, because Congress has called a special hearing around LLMs due to teen suicides, that 3/4 of all teens now have an AI companion. That's some of the things I've used it for include condensing my CV. You know, you get to a certain age, your CV gets really long. Somebody asked me, can you create a 5-page version of your CV? I'm just like, oh my gosh, there goes my weekend. No, Claude to the rescue. Put my CV into Claude. It comes out with a 5-page version, gets everything perfectly accurate, and formats it. Like, formatting CVs is horrible. It formatted it for me. Developing lectures and slides. I talk to it about what kinds of things I want to include in lectures. It suggests examples, points me to websites. I develop the slides and the thinking, and then it comes back with suggestions on improvement, survey questions, editing letters of support. I don't use it for writing letters of support, but definitely giving me feedback on my writing. Writing job descriptions. I had to write a couple job descriptions. I gave it a couple totally unrelated job descriptions from U of T, but they have the format, the U of T format for job descriptions. It came back and I said, you know, here's what I want in this new job. It comes back with a beautifully formatted job description that puts all the bullet points in the right place. Helps me pronounce people's names. I can put in the spelling of the name and use voice mode to pronounce it for me. Really helpful, especially in other languages. Reading PDFs out loud, transcribing meetings. I use it in research in all kinds of ways. NSERC now has guidance on use of LLMs for writing grants and so forth. And as I said, I have my AI, U of T AI strategy assistant, and a bunch of other homemade GPTs that I call on. Oop. So there's also lots of concerns about this technology. We're concerned that AI is going to take the place of authentic learning. Faculty are overwhelmed by what's called AI slop, which is crap AI written stuff being submitted in courses. Some of our philosophy professors and others in the humanities report that a large fraction of the materials that they are getting submitted are from AI written. Equity, who has access. Environmental, like the energy usage for these data centers is huge, especially for training. Interpretability, alignment, damage to people who rely on chatbot systems for advice, scams, intellectual property and ownership. You don't own the thing that the chat writes. Neither does the company. It was created by a non-human, which means that there is no ownership or copyright on that material if it's written by. But it may simulate someone else's art or someone else's writing. You know, and the OpenAI is being sued by the New York Times for training on its material, as there's a number of other lawsuits. So I'll just quickly talk a bit about the task force report that came out this past June, and you'll probably be hearing more about it around the university. We had 6 working groups on the task force related to research and student services, operations, administration, as well as teaching and learning, and asking some deep questions about how do we rethink assessment, or what could we use this for in terms of student support, augmenting student support, or forecasting for university planning purposes. And the first line in the report says, we are an institution dedicated to the development of human potential. This is really important. We think it is critically important that we remain a human-centered institution. We might be super efficient if we were robots teaching robots, but that's not a university. And so how do we keep the AIs from coming between us? You know, I, in the future, could see a future where I'm sitting at my desk all day, tasking my AI agents to do this, to do that. I'm writing emails, I'm doing all of these things. I go home at the end of the day and I've never talked to anybody, because those agents are talking to the other people's agents, right? And we are allowing this technology to really come between us and to kind of slice up our community. And we've done that before. As humans, we've allowed highways through the middle of cities and neighborhoods. We've allowed social media to cut up our communities in really, sometimes social media can be really helpful, and other times it can be really devastating to our society. And so how do we not fall into that same trap with this technology, and we keep people and our relationships at the center of this, and not let the technology kind of slice and dice us? We've asked questions like, what are the skills or competencies that students, faculty, and staff need? How will people change their work? What does the future look like? And the report has some scenarios about what do operations look like in the future? What do student services look like in the future? And then, and I can provide these slides for people, but I know you're also recording it, so that will be useful. But there's overall 6 recommendations from the report. AI literacy being one of the key ones. How do we help all of our faculty, staff, and students understand this technology so they can make wise decisions about when to use it and when not to use it? How are we creating an AI-ready data infrastructure at the university? Because good data is at the foundation of accurate and useful AI, and our data house is not in order at the university. We're interested in secure AI tools, prioritizing really impactful use cases, and figuring out the protocols we'll need for testing these systems. If we have a student-facing chatbot that's meant to be helping with student services, that's not just about checking to make sure that private information isn't being fed back to the company. It's making sure it's accurate, it's unbiased, it's supporting the students and not leading them down some weird rabbit hole. These are all important considerations for adopting this technology, and it's different than that kind of algorithmic technology. So the working group on teaching and learning talked about changing how we teach and changing what we teach. And this will very much depend on the disciplinary area of having those conversations about what needs to go into the curriculum for students in that discipline, and also what are the kinds of pedagogical approaches that are going to change as a result of this, including assessment practices. So I'll just end here with a bunch of the tools for teaching and learning that we're now enabling at the university. This includes open educational resource modules, pilots with AI tutors in classes. We have close to 90 now, actually, courses this year that will have AI tutors in them. I mean, we have 12,000 courses every year at the university. So 90 is a small fraction, but these are faculty who are trying out this, making an AI tutor that is trained specifically on the course materials available to students 24/7. We have secure licenses available that are private, so that your data does not go to the company for training. Copilot available to all faculty, staff, and students. And so it's really about getting AI into the hands of faculty and students in secure ways, in trustworthy ways, so that they can start to try and figure out what might be useful and where we might want to put in some additional guardrails into our systems. And I do think it will have a profound effect in the long term. I think things like our learning management system, which is very algorithmic right now. You go in and you go to a folder to get this, and a folder over there to get that, and then you go over here to get the syllabus, and you go over there to find lecture notes, will be much more agentic. The student will type in the question they have, like, when's the exam? And it will deliver the answer by going to the right place to find it. Oh, but I want to learn more about this topic. Can you tell me where in the lecture notes this came up? I need to connect to a TA, help me connect to a TA. It will handle that navigation just like a self-driving car in some sense does some of that for you. So lots of websites, and I will skip over those because I know people want coffee and tea. But they are in the slides, and I will have them available for folks if you are interested in clicking through some of those. And I thought I would put up just a few more references, a couple books that I really like in this technology if you're interested. And I'll leave it there. Thank you.